Hello everybody and welcome to this battle of GSC Ubers. Today I wanted to show you a game between two of the top players of the current era of GSC Ubers, that being the two German top players Conflict and Vani. This game was played in Uber's Premier League in 2023, so it's roughly 8 months ago from the time of recording. And I think that this was an excellent game that showcased two different teams played in a interesting manner, in a well executed and quite quickly paced game. So let's get into it. I hope you'll enjoy. So we're starting things off, and let's not jump ahead too early. We're just gonna look at the leads for a bit here. So we see Mewtwo versus Mew, and at the time of this game being played, Mew lead was still being explored. It was not as much of a certainty what you'd face. Uh, People knew that Thunderwave Mew was good, but Conflict was also known to carry around ideas of Thunder Mew, Surf Mew, Earthquake Mew in the lead position, so you couldn't make any certain assumptions. Mewtwo, on the other hand, is a time-tested lead. It can be barrier lead, which is generally just a solid mon that you might want to bring up as a lead to make sure that you're not getting blown out of the water in any individual lead matchup, or you want to spread toxic early, or it's an offensive lead that tries to punish opposing Zapdos leads, punish opposing Cloyster leads. Maybe not so hard against opposing Mewtwo or Snorlax leads, though, depending on RNG, of course, with Dynamic Punch and whatnot. So, Vani makes the judgment call that his Mewtwo should not risk paralysis from this Mew, and goes for a bold play, which is to send in Cloyster straight on Mew. This can work. This can also meet a Thunder. If this Mew was to Thunder here, Cloyster would either die or take a significant chunk of HP to the point where it would no longer be a usable mon. But it works out. Mew uses Thunder Wave and Miracle Berry cures Vani's Cloyster from paralysis at once. So play then continues and Conflict reveals Fire Blast and Vani gets spikes up. So this is now already quite much better for Vani than it was just at the start, because this Mew has now showed its hand. This Mew will likely, although not certainly, but likely, it will be Thunderwave, Fire Blast, Swords Dance, Explosion. And Vani, with this information, he can play around this. He has gotten spikes up too. So Cloyster, it has fulfilled the primary purpose. We don't know if Conflict has a spinner, but if he doesn't, then this Cloyster has done a fair share. But Vani goes back and tries to say, okay, you got these two moves, that's fine. My Mewtwo can handle this. I was a bit scared previously, but now I have spikes up. There is no cero miedo. There is no fear. But then he shows, haha, I was only baiting you to boom onto me, and tries to catch it with Golem. Or at least that's the only rationale I can come up with why he would choose to pivot between Mewtwo first before going to Golem. Because otherwise, Golem is just a safe play in general. But okay, it didn't cost Vani anything because Fire Blast missed. So nothing was revealed except that he would like for Conflict to boom onto the Golem. But okay, Fire Blast connects. PP consumed, but usually this won't matter too much because this Mew is likely going out on its own terms with Explosion anyway. And Golem comes in, takes a Thunder Wave, but, you know, that's not going to do much, but neither is Fire Blast. So Conflict here was probably trying to catch Vani being cute again, going back to Mewtwo. But it's also somewhat risk-free because Earthquake would be a non-trivial amount of damage, but it's not the worst thing in the world for Conflict if he has to take that. And Roar, as seen here, it's not that bad either. In this case, Zapdos comes in, and that's a threat, because in Ubers, if you don't know, GSC Ubers, Zapdos almost always carries HP Water. This is because in Ubers, you don't have a lot of Exegators, but you do still have the Steelixes, the Golems, even the Tyrannitars if you want, where HP Water is relevant. And the primary target for HP Ice would be Celebi, but the damage is not that significant. It's not enough for a 3-hit KO. And if you just want to target Celebi, then you have Drill Peck at your disposal as well. So HP Water is the most common choice here. And so we will see Vani respects this. He goes into Raikou, but it turns out that this is an offensive team, most likely. We could suss that out from the Mew lead, but it's even more offensive than we may have initially perceived, because this is Zapdos uses Thunder Wave. So it's quite likely that this Zapdos will not bring any recovery to the table, but it might bring, say, Thunder, HP Water, Thunder Wave, and then Whirlwind is an option, Reflect is an option, Drill Peck is an option. But Rest, technically an option, but would be unusual. And Raikou, not thrilled to take Paralysis, but also it has Rest. It can handle it. And we see Conflict going to his dedicated electric move Absorber, which is Snorlax, very reasonable. And Vani decides, alright, I'll handle this with my Lugia. And now here already at turn 8, we can see that Vani has revealed effectively his entire team. There are no really viable teams in GC Ubers that do not run Snorlax, so we can safely assume that his last Pokemon on this team will be a Snorlax. So we can then see at turn 8 we have Mewtwo, no moves revealed yet, Cloyster, chipped down to half, Miracle Berry consumed. This is not a healthy Cloyster at all. We have a Golem, that's healthy and dandy, Paralyzed Raikou, and a Lugia. And as we'll see right now, it's a toxic variant. And in the same vein, Conflict reveals Body Slam. So Conflict, he has not revealed many mons, but he has revealed his general game plan here. He's about the Thunderwave Mew, Thunderwave Zapdos, Body Slam Snorlax. You're seeing the trend here. Everything is lining up towards Paralysis. There is a goal here for Conflict. He's supporting some kind of slower threat. We don't know the details of it yet because Mew, Zapdos, Snorlax is a very anonymous structure. But this is an offensive team that looks to support some kind of slow mon. Marowak, Tyranitar, Vaporeon, those kinds of beasts. So we'll see which one it ends up being. It could be multiple. But yeah, Vani can recognize this, probably does recognize this as well. So he's dealing with some frail threat. If he can outlast Conflict's team, he's in a good position here. Whereas Conflict is probably trying to put this game to bed quite quickly. And he has the advantage of seeing everything on Vani's side. So we have Mewtwo, Cloyster, Golem, Lugia, Raikou. It's a solid core. I've used it many times myself. Oh, and the Snorlax, of course. This is a favorable matchup for Conflict, I would say, because Vani's team does not. It's quite slow and bulky. It can take hits, but it does not handle status very well. On a team like Vani's, the most common case is that you have 2 rest users, Snorlax and Raikou, and 4 Mons that do not use rest. You can use rest on Golem, maybe even on Cloyster in some weird teams. Definitely not this one though. And similarly, rest on Golem in this lineup, I also wouldn't advise, really. But you could do it. There's an argument to be made for it. But that leaves your primary Snorlax checks here. Golem, Lugia, and possibly Mewtwo, possibly in some instances also Cloyster. They do not like status. And what we're seeing here is Body Slam Snorlax. It's going to pound away at this Lugia. It's going to get the paralysis sooner or later if it gets the opportunity to do so. And Thunderwave Mew can come in, can get the paralysis onto Mewtwo, possibly. Zapdos, that's probably just hitting Raikou. But Raikou will remain paralyzed until it finds a moment to rest. And right now it's at full HP. You can't rest. So it's a sketchy situation. So I'm liking Conflict's odds here. Odds here, based just on the matchup alone. Okay, so play continues, and Vani decides to stall out for toxic damage for a bit. He dodges Body Slam Paralysis, and then decides, alright, Lugia did its job, time to head out to Golem. And Conflict is here down to 55% with Toxic and Spikes. So he's quite committed here to resting, if he has rest. It is possible to click another move, but it would leave you taking 25 from Toxic. So you'd go down, and then you gain 6.25 back, but you'd go down to 36% if you do not use rest here as Snorlax, just from Toxic alone. So with that in mind, is there a way for Vani to counteract this? We could probably suss out that this Conflict Snorlax, it probably has Earthquake. We don't know this for certain, but we can believe it to have Earthquake. And then if it has, it could either have Rest, or because this is such a high-paced team, it could also have Self-Destruct. I don't think that there are any other great takes on this Snorlax set, given what's already been revealed on Conflict's team. But we can assume Earthquake, and either Rest or Boom, in my opinion. Lovely Kiss is not very favorable in combination with Body Slam, because you get a very low damage output from Body Slam, and you might end up paralysing targets that you would have liked to sleep, such as Tyranitar. So what do we do? Vani decides, alright, I'm going to go back to Lugia, and Conflict does indeed commit to the rest. So maybe here was an opportunity for Vani to do something more aggressive. There was an opportunity to boom if he wanted to, although I can understand why you maybe do not really want to, because it's a lot. There's still a lot of unrevealed mods on Conflict side, and if there is a Tyranitar with Curse, Roar, Rest, Rock Slide, Golem is gonna be Vani's best line of defense against that. So until he has sussed out what are the threats that I need to defend against, it is very scary to blow up a single individual defensive piece when there is a limited amount of redundancy. In some instances, Cloyster can act as a secondary check in dire positions, but here, the Vani Cloyster, we know it's already at 53% with no item. That's not going to be a reliable rock-type check. So Vani makes the judgment call that Golem is too valuable. He has identified that, okay, Conflict is running an offensive team, and he's probably supporting a slower sweeper. Tyranitar is a very viable pick in that role. So he decides to not risk anything with Golem, and just goes to Lugia. If there's an Earthquake, Lugia would take it, 0 damage taken. But yeah, Conflict does the safe option as well, and gets rewarded for it. And rest hits. And Lugia whirlwinds out, and Mew comes back in, and Mew reveals no leftovers. This is probably not a surprise to Vani. Mew in the lead position usually runs Miracle Berry. It could run something like Magnet as well to get better damage on Thunder rolls, especially relevant versus Cloyster. But in this case, it's very likely Miracle Berry. Lugia, you don't want that paralyzed. We covered this before. The weakness of this team is how susceptible to status it is. So, Vani decides to go for a safe play, go to Raikou, and block paralysis that way. However, Mew just sword stances. And Vani does not want to risk his Raikou, so he goes to Golem. Now, here, Mew sword stances again, and at +3, when you, or +4 times 3, whichever way you prefer, there is no Mon in the game that lives that strong of an explosion from Mew. No matter, assuming 0 boosts, of course, from the defender side. So here, if Conflict wants to, he can click Explosion and eliminate this Golem. But he decides to instead go for Fire Blast, and Golem uses Roar. So okay, this sends a bit of a signal to me that maybe Conflict thinks he can get more value out of this Mew down the road. Maybe he's not in a hurry to eliminate this Golem, because Vani is playing quite tensely around it. By now, Golem, you're fully aware of this set here. There is no real alternative to Explosion Last. So in my mind, Vani again had the opportunity to go for Earthquake here to get some more mileage. Conflict's probably not switching out. He didn't do it previously. He was happy to try to fish for chip damage or paralysis onto something. But he goes for Roar. I think it's fine, but I think Earthquake is probably better. This Mew is inevitable, unless you can wear it down in a more significant way. And Spikes helps you to get there, but Vani's team does not really have that much of an immediate damage output with the exception of Raikou Thunder, and Raikou is paralyzed right now, so it's not so great. So this Mew is likely to get off its boom anyway. Anyway, Roar happens, and Vani gets very much punished because Cloyster comes in, and Golem has to run, and Conflict seizes the opportunity and gets Spikes up. So we're at an even Spikes field. Vani can't possibly spin this away, but he has to get in the position to do so. And until then, this Spikes will pressure Cloyster primarily. You know, no leftovers. That's always tough. That's a big trade-off. Miracle Berry is great up until the moment you take damage. Then you really start missing leftovers. So it's good on offensively inclined teams. Vani's team, not necessarily the most offensively inclined. You know, you can see 2 booms at the surface reading, Cloyster and Golem. But there's no immediate fast-paced energy to this team, so to say. But he, indeed, as we covered previously, he's lacking in tools to cover status. He does not like paralysis, he does not like sleep. Miracle Berry is one way of combating this, and indeed it helped him to get up Spikes early. But yeah, here we see Mewtwo reveals Flamethrower, so you could assume that it's a Barrier Toxic Flamethrower recover variant, which would give a fair share of redundancy to Vani's team with a lot of mons that, you know, kind of do the same physical walling thing, although Mewtwo can also act as a special wall in some instances. But Conflict sends in Snorlax and takes a boom. So it was not barrier Snorlax at all, or barrier Mewtwo. It was self-destruct. And now we're seeing a bit of a idea here, maybe. Maybe this Vani team is a bit more offensively inclined than we were first led to believe. So this is big. Uh, on conflict side of things, this Snorlax was the sole Thunder Absorber. Indeed, this Snorlax was what was sent out when Raikou hit the field previously. So it's a strategically sound boom from Vani in the sense that he is removing a key defensive piece. But it is also a bit of a risky one because on paper, this Snorlax should still be fine to handle for a few more turns. There is still opportunities to get information on Conflict's team to know what you're doing. And this was also maybe a good opportunity to get Cloyster in and set up an explosion. So 50 with spikes up, this Cloyster will enter the field at 41-42%, and that's not a lot at all. You can barely take a Snorlax. You can take a Snorlax Body Slam. You know that it's Body Slam, so you can enter on that. But you can't enter on Fire Blast. You can't enter on Zapdos. You can go for a speed tie at best versus opposing Cloyster Surf. And then there's two unrevealeds. So trying to get value out of this Cloyster with Snorlax gone will be a bit more difficult now. Golem as well. Golem is not as good of a mon once the opposing Snorlax is removed. There are some key defensive traits still to it, such as Tyranitar. But Golem without a Snorlax to stare down is not so happy, I would say in general. So this was a very impactful maneuver by Vani to go for the self-destruct. So let's see the consequences here. Raikou comes in, Mew comes in. So Conflict is getting his boom here. Sword Stance, Crunch is being used. Accurate option forces Conflict's hand here. And at this point, what do you go to here with if you're Vani? You have Cloyster. That's a bit risky because this Raikou, it can kill Mew with a crit, but it's not a guarantee, of course. Golem can take Fire Blast, can take Thunder Wave, but dies to Boom. And you've been doing this dance a bit, and it feels like there's been an intention from Vani's side to try to avoid letting Golem die to Mew. So it would be a bit, what's the word, inconsequential. It would be out of character, out of the game plan that Vani has set up for himself to let Golem take that boom. Raikou is the mon that you're trying to position here. Raikou is the mon that you're actively trying to persevere and save for future encounters. So you can't really let that take the boom. And that leaves Lugia and Snorlax for the boom absorbing. And yeah, if you can't do it with Cloyster, then it's one of those two. And Snorlax still has a lot of gas left in the tank. If it can get set up with curses, it should have a good opportunity. Curselax is a tough encounter for offensive teams. They often have to spend multiple booms to get rid of it. So you probably want to save that. Lugia, maybe not so great versus Zapdos. Cloyster, pretty good there, admittedly. But doesn't resist boom. Does take a significant chunk, but does not die. But it still has utility. So what is the decision? In the end, Vani decides to go to Lugia and Conflict pulls the trigger. So we're down to 4-4, but Conflict has a fairly healthy team. Spikes are down on both sides. Vani paralyzed Raikou, half HP Cloister, slightly chipped Golem. And Conflict, still on that slow-paced sweeper game plan with a paralysis support. And Vani now has paralyzed Raikou, chipped Cloister, that's quite slow, Golem, very slow, Snorlax, very slow. And we get to the reveal, and there's a Marowak. So this changes a lot. This is, in honesty, this is in accordance with Conflict's game plan that he has shown. We were talking about the slow sweeper previously. You set up with paralysis support. You deny Vani the opportunity to rid himself of paralysis. You wear down the mons that you can. And in honesty, Vani was a bit helpful here too. So this Mewtwo would have been lovely to have around right now, for example. Even if it does not carry barrier, it's a faster self-destruct. Mewtwo can enter on Earthquake and live. Um, but that's not the tool set that we have right now. So it's going to be very important for Vani to somehow get rid of this Marowak, and it's going to be very important for Conflict similarly to save it from harm. Vani's Snorlax is easily the best thing he has right now to handle this Marowak. Cloister, without an item, with spikes up and at half HP, it's gonna be able to eat one Earthquake at most if the roll is favorable, and then it's done. So it's all Snorlax here acting as a line of defense against Marowak. You can see Golem, maybe if you speed tie and get the boom, you can remove Marowak, but obviously that's not a reliable solution. And if you get Marowak in on this paralyzed Raikou, that's going to be pretty much a guaranteed kill. So that's what Conflict was trying to catch here as well. He was trying to catch the paralyzed Raikou, but Vani read this or sussed out Conflict's intentions and went Snorlax in the blind. And that's quite good for him because this Snorlax looks fairly threatening with a curse up. Zapdos does not win against Snorlax. Cloister is, can get a boom off, but there's still some work to finish afterwards, though. But significant damage on Snorlax is also completely fine for Conflict, because that means that Marowak is effectively set to sweep. You just have to wear down Cloister a little bit through spikes, and then you're just gonna rake in the KOs. But Conflict does the responsible thing and takes Lovely Kiss with his Tyranitar, the normal resist. So Vani's gonna have to present a way to get forward here. With Lovely Kiss off the table, now this Marowak, should it enter again on Snorlax, it will be much happier to engage in a direct confrontation. But not so much as it stands. And Conflict goes straight into Cloister as Vani sets up a curse. And now, in the usual case, what you'd want to do here is you want to curse, you want to attack the Cloister, wear it down. As an aside, by the way, we can see that Conflict ran Mewtwo-less offense here, which is quite a rarity. But he's a unique team builder. He makes his builds work. It's not what I would use, but that's Conflict for you. Anyway, back to the Cloister Snorlax head-to-head. If this Snorlax eats an explosion from Cloister, this Marowak Earthquake will possibly kill, not a guarantee, but it is a possibility. And if you respect that possibility, you might want to switch out, but then you're never getting back in. This Snorlax, even though it's cursed up, it is very scared of eating the damage that an explosion represents here. So, with that in mind, Vani makes the very respectful and strategic decision to switch out, being fearful of this explosion. Now, the sad part is that because this is a cloister, Vani has his own chip down cloister and a golem. They can't come in on cloister. That's only possible if you're being very secure about predicting a boom. And the thing is that even though I've spoken about the virtues of exploding there with cloister, it is not a forced thing. Conflict can set toxic, he can set surf. There are many things that he can do to pressure Vani while also exerting pressure on the possible boom blockers. And let's say that Conflict clicks Surf. Let's see how that matches up. Surf would get the 2-hit KO on Cloister, 1-hit KO on Golem, and it wouldn't do significant damage to Raikou, but you would still be faster than it. You can still click Explosion to remove the Raikou if you so choose. But what ended up happening was that Cloister revealed Screech and missed it. So that's Conflict admitting that he has a slight weakness to Snorlax as a whole. Screech is generally something that you don't want to bring. It's quite unreliable. You usually paired with Clamp, and the fact that Cloister didn't have time to go for Clamp here is also unfortunate, but bad moveset in my opinion. So that's what you get, I guess. But yeah, Raikou comes in for free, and Conflict does not wish to boom or does not wish to have to predict around it, and instead sends in Marowak. If Raikou is clicking a button, he's almost assuredly clicking Thunder, possibly Rest to rid himself of paralysis. But Vani reads this switch and goes to Cloister. So Marowak takes spikes damage, but Cloister also takes spikes damage. We're down to 42. Marowak can't stay in. This is the win con. This is the best positioned Mon that Conflict has, even if it has to take spikes damage like this. So Conflict has to switch out, and he's in a sort of similar conundrum, but in reverse, as we highlighted previously when Conflict had Cloister in. Cloister does not get significantly damaged by Surf, if that's the move, but it does die to Boom, or almost assuredly, at least. And if there's a Surf that Vani throws out, he can then explode on the second turn, and Conflict has to play this mind game all over again. Tyranitar, 2-hit KO'd by Surf, it's sleeping, it's slower, it's not going to do anything in return. So that leaves Zapdos. And Zapdos is indeed where Conflict goes, but Vani does not execute. He does not click Explosion. So he's with this, I think that Conflict was fairly locked into Zapdos here. And I think Vani is saying that I need this Cloister more than you need your Zapdos. So this Zapdos is not an essential tool for Conflict because it's probably gonna eat Raikou or Snorlax all day, and those should have no issues, especially combined, handling this Zapdos, even if it gets paralysis off. Um, but this low HP Cloister, it's not entering on anything right now. The only move that it survives that is likely to be seen from Conflict side is an opposing Cloister Surf. It dies to Earthquake, it dies to Rock Slide, it dies to Electric Stab. So this Cloister is getting increasingly more and more something that you want to get rid of. You want to liquidate it with Explosion and bring something down with you, even if it's quote unquote just a Zapdos. That would still mean a threatless. It would still mean that you got your value out of your Mons. And in a game where, if we frame this as an offense versus offense matchup, you never want to be behind. You always want to maintain parity in the number of Mons that you both have available to you. Because otherwise, simplifying the position through explosion trades is going to favor the player with more Mons remaining. You never want to fall behind and have that happen to you. So, Vani decides to double to Snorlax. I think this is a mistake, as I covered. But that is what happens, and at least Snorlax faces up quite well versus this Zapdos. But Vani does not want to engage. He switches out from the Raikou. So what can we discern from this? Maybe this is a restless Snorlax, if it hates the option of Thunder Wave this much. But even then, I think that Snorlax, maybe you need to get something onto this Zapdos. The issue is, you really want to, but if you take that damage, this Marowak, its power grows in the dark. You really, really, really need that Snorlax for Marowak if you're Vani at this point. So Vani goes to Raikou, and unfortunately for Vani, that's a Whirlwind, Zapdos, and Cloyster comes in, has to switch out, back to Raikou, eats the Thunder, uh, and now it's looking quite dicey. This Raikou, half HP, Cloyster very worn down, Golem poorly positioned versus the opposing Mons of Conflict. We can see here that even though there is a Tyranitar here, this Golem is not living its best life because it's scared of Zapdos, it's scared of Marowak, it's scared of Cloyster. In my opinion, Golem is the kind of Mon in the general sense, mind you, that you want to make sure that you can liquidate it when the time is right. And here with a sleeping Tyranitar, I would make the case that you can probably it's probably preferable for you to get rid of Golem, but there is no opportunity. It's slower than Cloyster. It's one hit KO'd by Cloyster. It's slower than Zapdos. It's one hit KO'd by Zapdos. It's speed tying Marowak, and it's one hit KO'd by Marowak. Uh, you would love to spin with Golem here. You would love to boom with Golem here, but there is no opportunity. Conflict's team is playing at a rapid pace with sufficiently rapid Mons, and Golem just can't keep up. So Vani is really troubled here, and in this position, he goes for a good move. He goes for Crunch. He predicts the Marowak, but it's not enough. Marowak comes in anyway. He takes the Crunch. He's down to 37, but it doesn't matter. Earthquake gets a kill. And what does Vani decide? He must sacrifice something. Snorlax doesn't live. Golem doesn't live. Cloyster doesn't live. Raikou doesn't live. Vani will fall down 3 to 4 no matter what here. So what is the line chosen? In the end, Vani decides to sacrifice Golem. And this is now officially high risk. Cloyster, you're in. You have to boom here. You're a madman if you don't. You're one whirlwind away from being useless. And indeed, that's what happens. And now we're down to 3 to 2. Cloyster, Raikou. And Cloyster can boom here. Well, now we know that it does not, but let's just see it for how it is. If you boom here, that's last month Snorlax versus low HP Marowak and sleeping Tyranitar. Does not look necessarily great. You can get one Earthquake off with Marowak before Snorlax dies, but then sleeping Tyranitar has to be able to do it versus this anonymous Snorlax. This could still be restless with Earthquake. If it is, that's a bad sign for conflict. So he decides to hold on, go Tyranitar on the Raikou as it rests. And this looks very sketchy to me, because you're probably not waking up in time. This Raikou gets the heal off status. Thunder, if you connect 3 times, Thunder is very likely to 3-hit KO Tyranitar. But what ends up happening here is Raikou reveals Sleep Talk, but hits Crunch, and Conflict reveals Sleep Talk, Curse, Rock Slide, Rest, Tyranitar. This is awful for Vani. So now there is nothing to do but click Sleep Talk on both ends. Rock Slide quickly gets strong. quickly gets to a point where you absolutely cannot ignore it. But Vani has no options. He sacrificed his golem, he sacrificed his cloister. The only thing remaining is Raikou and the Snorlax that looks unlikely to carry Earthquake or any kind of coverage that hits Tyranitar for super effective damage. This Raikou has to do it, but it Sleep Talks, it hits Rest. Tyranitar hits Rest, that's fine. Uh, Thunder, you wake up, connect with a Thunder, okay, but Sleep Talk Rest. You Thunder again, you miss. Tyranitar, Sleep Talk Curse. Optimal rolls for Conflict. Vani thunders again, misses again. Conflict Sleep Talk hits Curse again, and this time he wakes up, and it's nothing to do but click Thunder, hope for the best, maybe dodge Rock Slide. No, that didn't happen. Maybe hit Thunder, maybe Para, maybe crit. Connects, but no side effect. Rock Slide connects, and this Tyranitar has turned the tide of the battle. It's cursed up, it's yoked up, it's big, it's fat. It can The Snorlax reveals curse, but Rock Slide, that's 44%. Snorlax down to 50. And Vani goes for a lovely kiss, and now it's over. Now Conflict has a guaranteed pathway to victory. He goes Marowak, and if Snorlax was to attack there, you go Cloister and kill with Boom, but there's no need. Double Edge, Earthquake is exchanged, Cloister comes in, and finally, Explosion seals the deal. Vani is dead, and Conflict has won the game in a very interesting game between two different playstyles. Overall, I think that Conflict had the better matchup here. This was a team tour. Maybe he did extensive scouting, but Conflict often claims that he builds his team 10 minutes before the game, so maybe not so heavy scouting. Who knows? Either way, this paralysis-based strategy was very successful against Vani's team. Vani had a bulky team with not as immediate offensive pressure, whereas Conflict had a slower, also quite slow, setup-based team with huge bursts of damage. And Vani's team got worn down to the point where it was no longer possible to hold on. Was there any one moment in this game that you can pinpoint and say, this is where Vani went definitely wrong? This is where Vani lost the game? No, there is no such moment in my opinion. I think that both players executed this game quite well according to their game plans. Unfortunately for Vani, his game plan never really came through when Marowak was revealed. The game plan was to blow up on these special walls and finish the game off with Raikou. I was told post-game that this Snorlax from Vani's side was it carried self-destruct, so it didn't have rest, which also helps explain why it was quite reluctant to absorb damage. But I think that as a general note, I think Conflict managed to win this because he was more aggressive with his aggressively paced team, and Vani was not. I think in the end it comes down to being worn down and not having the proper tools. And, initially it seemed that this Cloister, it got in, it got spikes off, took a Fire Blast, and maybe that was mission accomplished. But then the Mew continued to stick around, continued to be a bit of a nuisance for Vani, and Conflict got the momentum that he needed from some roars. Golem roared in Zapdos, which allowed Thunderwave. Golem roared in Cloister, which allowed Spikes. So maybe what Vani really needed was to play this a bit quicker. Although it's difficult to say, because if you're Vani, you want to roar to get that information as well. Information in this game, I think, was definitely key. Conflict held on to information very well in this game. Not only did he not reveal his 2 last mons until Vani was down to 4 mons, but he also kept Sleep Talk Tyranitar as a surprise for Vani. And because Vani did not know that Tyranitar had Sleep Talk, he sacrificed his Golem. If Golem had been around, this Tyranitar would have never gotten off the ground. You can always roar, you can always earthquake. But Golem was sacrificed, and that meant that this Tyranitar could execute in the end game. So I believe that's a very important takeaway if you've watched this match. Be mindful with information management. Make sure that you know what you're dealing with on the other end of the table and execute your game plan with that in mind. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I said that I would do some video about Mew or maybe team styles in GSC Ubers as a whole, but this was what I found inspiration for right now. Either way, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Take care and goodbye.